Mr. President, the moment of truth is almost here, the time when we will all have to cast our vote. And I would submit, Mr. President, that this is a sad day for our country. It's a sad day for the American taxpayer, and it's a sad day for future generations who will be left paying for this trillion-dollar spending bill. Mr. President, the American people are hurting, and they are demanding action. Unfortunately, Congress has failed the American people and lost an incredible opportunity to empower small businesses, owners, fixing our housing crisis, turning our economy around. There are so many things that could have been done with this opportunity, with this piece of legislation that actually would have meaningfully led to job creation and economic stimulus. In the few short hours the final bill language has been available, it's clear that the Democrat leadership has turned a deaf ear to the American taxpayer. The final spending bill still includes spending on wasteful government projects that have outraged taxpayers across the country. The final bill includes tax benefits for golf carts, $300 million for federal employee company cars, $1 billion for ACORN-eligible block grants, $50 million for an arts endowment, $165 million for fish hatcheries, $1 billion for the census. Instead of mouse habitats, electric golf carts, and fish barriers, Mr. President, Congress should have focused on serious proposals to address the housing crisis and create jobs through small business tax relief. Now, there were a number of opportunities. I view this as the case of the question of what could have been. A number of amendments that were offered last week that I think really would have addressed the crisis that we face in this country with respect to housing and job creation and getting our economy back onto a path to recovery. Senator McCain and Martinez and a group of other Republican senators offered an alternative that would have cut wasteful government spending, focused on targeted government investments, and significant tax relief. In fact, it included a well-thought-out and fiscally responsible proposal that would have cut off new spending after 2 consecutive quarters of economic growth greater than 2% of inflation-adjusted GDP. The alternative plan would have invested approximately $45 billion in transportation infrastructure, $17 billion in defense facilities and resetting our combat forces, targeted spending that would have rehabilitated our military facilities and equipment while creating jobs over the next 9 months, important tax relief that would have put money back in the hands of average middle-income families in this country and put incentives in place for small businesses to go out and create jobs and hire employees and purchase equipment, those sort of things. What's really unbelievable, and in my view a major flaw in the Democrat stimulus bill, Mr. President, is this simple fact. The bill that we will be voting on spends $6 billion on federal buildings and only $3 billion on small business tax relief. Small businesses, which create most of the jobs in our economy, 3/4 to 80% of jobs in this country, by some numbers, are created by small businesses. And what we ought to be doing is figuring out how can we get that economic engine going again so that small businesses are making those investments. But as I said before, $6 billion for federal buildings and only $3 billion on small business tax relief, a small, minuscule amount. In fact, it amounts to 1/3 of 1% of the final stimulus bill that's actually going to small business tax relief. Now, in terms of the way the bill breaks down, 27% of the entire bill, the almost $1 trillion bill, is in tax relief in some form, or tax provisions at least. Many of us would argue that it was meaningful tax relief. There are a lot better ways to deliver tax relief. The rest is in the area of spending. 47% of that spending doesn't occur in 2009 or 2010, and in fact only 11.3% is going to be spent in 2009, which means one thing, that there is a lot of spending in this bill that really can't be characterized as stimulus. In other words, it's spending that's going to go on and on and on for years to come. And in fact, what's sort of remarkable about it, the late President Ronald Reagan once said, the closest thing to immortality on this planet is a government program. Now, there's a letter out from the CBO in response to a question posed by a member of Congress, a House member, regarding some of the spending in the bill and what would happen if the 20 most popular government programs that are funded in this bill, if in fact at the end of the 2 years the funding doesn't terminate and is continued. In other words, a lot of this is spending that will go on and on over time. And what the CBO found, Mr. President, was that the total cost of this bill, if those programs are expended, and bear in mind these are popular things that it's going to be very difficult to turn off the spigot on, if the spending continues past that 2-year window, the cost of this thing explodes. $3.27 trillion. And just the interest alone, $744 billion. $3.27 trillion for much of the spending in this bill if it's continued beyond the 2-year window. And as I said before, according to CBO, only 47% of the spending part of this stimulus bill actually gets spent in 2009 and 2010. There are so many better ways that this could have been done, Mr. President. We offered amendments last week. I mentioned the Mccain Amendment. I offered an alternative which was focused on tax relief for middle-income families and small businesses, which, according to the methodology developed by the President's own economist, Christina Romer, would have created twice as many jobs at half the cost. 6.2 million jobs, and the cost of this amendment that was voted down last week was about $440 billion, or in rough terms, half of what we're looking at with the bill that we're going to be voting on today. The last amendment that I offered last week, actually toward the end of the debate, would have taken the total amount. Now, I don't happen to agree that we ought to spend this amount of money. I think it's stealing from future generations. But if we're going to do it, the question becomes, should Washington spend it, or should the American people spend it? So I took the total amount, divided it by every tax filer in this country, 182 million people who file a tax return in this country, and we could have given a rebate to a single filer of $5,143 and to a married couple filing jointly of $10,286. If we take the total amount in this bill and divide it among the taxpayers in this country. Now, I'd be willing to bet that a lot of people in this country would much rather have that check than have their money going to Washington, D.C. to spend on these new programs, many of which are going to create obligations and liabilities for generations to come. And so, Mr. President, I think we missed a golden opportunity here. I think we have created a whole new realm of spending that's going to go on for some time into the future. It is not fair to our children and grandchildren. The federal government needs to learn to live within its means. And I can tell you, as someone who comes from the prairies, that when the prairie pioneers settled South Dakota and places like that, they understood a basic principle or a basic ethic, and that is that they were going to have to sacrifice so that their children and grandchildren, future generations, could have a better life. What we have done with this bill is turned that very ethic entirely on its head. What we are asking future generations to do is to sacrifice by handing them $1 trillion debt, and so in order that we, here and now, can have a better life, and that we can't live up to the obligations that we have to pay our bills on time. So, Mr. President, it is a sad day. It's unfortunate. It could have been much different. There could have been a lot more input from our side with regard to the shape of this bill. It is a bill that's heavy on spending, and not only temporary spending, but spending that will continue to go on for some time into the future and create obligations down the road. And as I said, if this is correct and the CBO response to this letter is accurate, if these programs continue to be funded and don't terminate at the end of this 2-year period, $3.27 trillion in liabilities we are creating today by voting for this legislation. It is not fair to our children and grandchildren, Mr. President. It is not fair to the future generations who are going to bear the cost of the fact that we cannot live within our means and that we cannot come up with a way to fund an economic recovery plan that creates jobs and help stimulate the economy and get this recovery underway in a fashion that's fiscally responsible. So I regret the fact that I will be voting no on this bill, Mr. President, and I would urge my colleagues here in the United States Senate to do the same thing, and I yield back the balance of my time.